right, but essentially we have a good debate tonight. Really interesting topic. I'm glad to see so many people are here. We're going to be talking about the question of morality today. And we're going to be seeing two different worldviews at play here. So again, thanks for coming. Just to lay out a bit of the format first, this is how it's going to take place. Professor Barkman is going to be speaking first, and he's going to be speaking, presenting his argument, presenting his side. And right after he's done presenting, we're going to have an opportunity for you guys to ask him questions individually right away. And after you guys ask the original questions, Justin Trottier, he's going to speak and present his side. Then you're going to have a chance to ask him 1, 2, 3 quick individual questions. And then we're going to go into rebuttals. Each of them are going to have a chance to rebut. And then we're going to go from there to an open dialogue between the two. And they're going to speak for about 10, however long, about 10 minutes. And then we're going to finish off with questions from the audience. So there's going to be a lot of audience participation. We want to have you guys asking questions to both people. And you know what? It's gonna be really good. So quickly, just to introduce the topic a little bit before we charge right into this. So again, the topic of tonight's debate: can we be good without God, and where does our morality come from? The experience of ethics and morality is a realm of philosophy that great thinkers throughout the millenniums have attempted to explain and justify. In its simplest form, morality is the knowledge of knowing right from wrong and good actions from bad actions. How do we know what is good and bad? Should I or should I not do a specific action? Why should I act morally in the world? And where does our morality come from, and how can I know where it came from? These questions have caused philosophers from as early as ancient Greece to think about and attempt to answer. The answers posed to these questions and the topic of tonight's debate are very numerous, lots of different answers to these questions. Many thinkers continue to believe that God continues to be the reason why we act and behave morally. As the ultimate creator of the universe, he is thought to be the giver and the very source of our morality, giving us a law to live by, knowing right from wrong. However, the continual growth and success of science has challenged traditional theistic assumptions about morality. Contemporary philosophers like Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett would have us believe that morality can be explained in a purely natural and evolutionary means. There is no reason for belief or acknowledgement of God in order to either ground morality or to be moral people. Tonight, we'll be hearing answers from two very different worldviews. The speakers have their answers. So, is it possible that we can be good without God, and where does our morality ultimately come from? The answers await. From here, I'll introduce our speakers and let them attempt to explain the answers to us. Professor Barkman, you guys, how many students here have had Professor Barkman?
How many good students?
Okay, I won't introduce him then. And Justin Trottier, he's from the Center of Inquiry for Canada. It's a secular humanist foundation organization that runs out of Toronto. He's done lots and lots of things. He's involved with politics, philosophy, debates. He's got a lot of knowledge, and we're really excited to have him out tonight. So I guess really without further ado, I guess we'll get going. And Professor Barkman, the floor is yours. I will.
All right, man. Okay, so the question that PJ asked is, can we be good without God? And I'm going to give a theistic response. Not, unfortunately, a Christian theistic response. We don't have the time to get into a defense of Christian theism specifically. It's only an hour long, and that would take much more. But a theistic response will get us at least halfway there. And so that's what I propose to look at. Okay, but first we need to clarify the question, since PJ did not do that for us. We have two questions here that are being asked. The first one is the epistemological question. Can I be good without knowing that God exists? And my answer to that, and some of you are not going to like it, is yes, you in fact can be good without knowing God exists. Surprise. However, I will argue at the end that it is likely that person A, as a theistic moral realist, would be better than person A as an atheistic moral realist, who in turn would likely be better than person A as an atheistic non-moral realist. Greater truth playing at least some factor, though not any necessary factor, in our moral actions. And the second question that might be asked, and I hope to address as well, is that of the metaphysical. Can I be good without God existing? And the answer to that is, for those who would like a nice contentious debate, A very humble answer. Yes, it's logically possible to be good without God existing. However, I think that God is the best explanation for goodness. And of course, then I'll recommend theism as the best alternative. Okay? All right, so the contours of my argument, I'll take a basic modus ponens type of argument. So premise one, if there's a universal, unchangeable, objective moral law, then it's likely that theism, or then the likelihood of theism increases. I don't know what degree, but it increases. And atheism decreases. Premise two, a universal, unchangeable, objective moral law does in fact exist. Therefore, the likelihood of theism increases and atheism decreases. I will have to argue for this, of course. Now, to speak of universal moral law is to speak of moral realism. So if we talk about there being an objective universal moral law, or as Catholics call it the natural law, or as some Reformed thinkers will call it the general revelation, whatever we want to call it, it's premised on this metaphysical position that there is, in fact, or what we call moral realism. Now, to show that moral realism is the preferred way of doing ethics, we first need to dismiss, or at least deal with, non-moral realist ethics. We can't do justice to that type of dismissal, but I'll try to give some arguments for why I think non-moral realism is not the preferred way. So all of you who know me know some of the examples I give. But let's consider the case of Trottier Stafford, this 8-year-old girl, I think is from London, I don't remember, who was kidnapped, raped, and brutally murdered. How might the atheistic, non-moral realist deal with this? The person who denies that there is a universal, unchanging moral law. How does he deal with the idea that there's raping and murdering little girls simply for the fun of it? Well, the first type of the non-moral realist we might call the subjectivist. This person says that what is what's right for me and for me alone. So I might not want to rape and murder little girls, but I can't say it is necessarily, logically necessarily wrong for the rapist to murder. I might not like it, but I can't say that's wrong for that person. Then there's the cultural relativist, or the person who imagines that morality is that which the group decides is right. So we could say that Canadian society, maybe that's the group we're talking about, Canadian society as a whole is opposed to rape and murder, but this, of course, theoretically could change. It's logically possible, at least, that some society might approve of raping and murdering innocent girls, and then we could not say that they're necessarily wrong for that. There might be a planet in the universe where this happens, and who are we to judge that? Then there's a response to the utilitarian. Of course, there's different types of utilitarians, and we'll deal with them in broad strokes here. I hope I don't do injustice to them. But their claim is that what is right is what promotes the most non-moral good. Pleasure, intellectual satisfaction, and so on. Now, as it stands, raping and murdering little girls seems to produce more harm than non-moral good. Most utilitarians would want to argue that. Nevertheless, it's logically possible that in some cases, raping and murdering innocent girls might produce more non-moral good. For instance, it's not hard to imagine that in some possible situation, in order to save 2 people, that's all we might need, but we can increase it to 10 if we like. In order to save 2 people, all we need to do is to find some homeless girl who is not particularly known to anyone, rape her, and murder her. And of course, this, on the utilitarian account, would be acceptable, especially if we were to say that no one would know that we've done this, and if we were to say that we're not burdened by this. And since it's unlikely that most of us would become homeless, the ruling utilitarian position is not particularly convincing. Now, all 3 of these non-moral realist positions are positions that are typically not held by theists. And again, there are some objections to it, I think. I think if you were to accept any of these 3 positions, you'll find yourself accepting something which is absurd. And so again, I'll put the argument in form of a reductio ad absurdum. For those of you who didn't pay attention to logic, which is I suppose many of you, what the argument goes like this. I want to prove that there's a universal moral law, so I assume the opposite. There is no universal moral law. And now I need to show that that's absurd, as the ancients would call it, or at least unacceptable. Now, as you saw in the previous slide, it does seem to be unacceptable or absurd, any of the non-moral realist explanation for rape, for example. It seems that rape is always, in every case, wrong, in all possible worlds wrong, especially raping little girls simply for the fun of it. But rape itself seems always, in every case, wrong, not dependent on individuals or groups or anything else. Because it seems absurd on any of the accounts that I gave, therefore, there is a universal moral law. But the question we're asking is also, what is the ground of the universal moral law? We want to ask a metaphysical question. Now, the two best alternatives, I say best because that's what we're engaging with here, would be the atheistic moral realist position. I think Sam Harris would accept this. I'm not sure exactly what he maintains on this, but I think so. And then there's the theistic moral realist. And again, not all Christians maintain this to their shame, but many Christians would, and others as well, Confucius, for instance. So an atheistic moral realist, what are some of the assumptions they make? First of all, most atheists will accept what's called metaphysical naturalism. This is the metaphysical claim that all things arise from matter and are dependent, at least, on matter, which is itself always in flux. And of course, if you're a moral realist, you accept that there is a universal moral law. Now, given these two things together, I see that there are at least 4 problems with atheistic moral realism. 4 problems aren't things that they could avoid, but I think that theism can explain them better. And therefore, theism is the more rational position. Problem 1, whence the universal moral law? Now, an atheist could go Plato's right and say that the universal moral law simply is there. It exists in the world of forms. Nevertheless, I've never met an atheist who's very excited about being called a Platonist, since Plato does expel all atheists from his ideal city, believing the gods being one of the basic moral principles, I suppose. But you could also go what's called the epiphenomenalist route. And again, if you have not taken metaphysics, it's a big word. Basically, this route says that the material brain gives rise to a mind, which is itself a hugely controversial thing in the philosophy of mind, which then gives rise to the universal moral law. However, this seems a bit odd to us, I suppose, because it makes the higher thing, the seemingly unchangeable thing, the law, dependent on the changeable thing, the brain. And this is especially unlikely, I think, if we are to say that if in this universe, all of the brains, for example, were eventually to be abolished or done away with in a big crunch. So the universe is coming to an end now, and everything is done away with. And perhaps this big crunch gives birth to a new Big Bang. And the new Big Bang then will develop new types of brains, possibly, and new types of minds. Would the atheist moral realist have any reason to think that the universal moral law would arise in that new world? Would it be true in that world that it's always wrong to rape little girls for fun? The naturalist, atheist, I think, has no good reason to think so, though certainly blind faith is an option. Problem 2. The nature of moral obligation or duty seems incompatible with atheistic moral realism, or at least not very convincing. Just because a principle like, I shouldn't torture dogs for no reason, exists, it hardly follows that I should obey these laws. Right? Why should I obey them? As atheist ethicist Richard Taylor says, a duty is something that's owed. But something can be owed only to some person or persons. There can be no duty in isolation.